Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining for this webinar. The topic for this webinar is the future of climate financing in South Asia, opportunities and challenges. I am your host, Rizwan Ali, and I am leading the PRISA disaster management part of PRISA, the think tank based in London. So before we go to this important topic, let me have a brief introduction to Dr. Bapon Shamsuddin. He is a leading expert on climate resilience. He has over 22 years of experience advising governments and organizations around the world on disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. He is a hydrologist. His specialty is in climate risk assessment, early warning systems, community resilience and water security. Dr. Fakhruddin is currently leading the water sector at the Green Climate Fund. He oversees climate investments in vulnerable countries around the world to support water security and early warning project organization. Previously, he held strategic planning and advisory roles with UN agencies, MDBs, including UNDRR, WMO, and ADB, where he advanced policies, frameworks, and operational multi-hazard early warning system for enhanced climate risk management. We warmly welcome and say our sincere thanks to Dr. Bapon for his time and presenting this very important topic, climate financing. We cannot stress more how important it is, and especially for the region of South Asia, including Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Afghanistan. And we will have a question answer session at the end of this presentation. Presentation may be around 20 minutes, and then we can have a concluding remarks at the end. Thank you so much, Papan, and over to you.
Thanks, Rizwan, for inviting. This has been a pleasure to be here. Probably I'll be just trying to cover a little bit about how the Green Climate Fund work and our strategy, as well as looking at the South Asian or South Asia perspectives. What are the key challenges we see, and what could be an opportunity as well? Because challenges always brings many other opportunities. So I could talk maybe 10-15 minutes, and happy to have a more interactive session as we see. We have a little bit small group, so it would be good to discuss more on that way. So let me just share my screen a bit. So as I don't know how many of you actually know about the Green Climate Fund. We said we are actually quite unique institution globally who has a mandate to support the climate financing under the UNFCCC framework, which is like implementing the Paris Agreement. And we are a country-driven organization where we provide a catalytic financing, not just for project, but also to ensure that actually how country could actually have access to readiness, as well as many other way to enhancing their capability. So other than our regular project, through the UNFCCC process, as well as NDC and NAP, we provide support to developing such kind of documentation, as well as up to $4 million per year to getting country to build their capacity, which could actually in the future support for the programming. So any country you based in South Asia, your country has actually able to access those kind of financing. Feel free to look at in Google your country and GCF. You can see actually what are the finance, how many projects, what are the readiness activities are ongoing. It would be easy for you to follow up. And we are also a open organization. So we provide, as a funder, we are a second due diligence organization. So that means we work through our partner organization, our accredited entity, what we call. So we have more than 200 accredited entity at this moment globally, but also we are unique in a sense because we provide a highly concessionality into the financing, so that we bring various instrument which none other agency actually can able to provide to adapt and mitigate the climate change. And we have a strong risk appetite. So that means any new innovation which is not even actually in the market in the field, we can take some of those risks to see how we can actually create a paradigm shift for the climate action. But also we are unique in a sense of we provide a 50-50 mandate for adaptation and mitigation. So any project or our overall financing need to be make sure that we cover both the area of mitigation and adaptation. So for emission reduction, we try to look at energy generation, transport, buildings, as well as forestry and land use. But also for the adaptation, we try to look at more on the people, livelihood, and communities, food, health, water security. I lead the water security sector, infrastructure and environment, ecosystem and ecosystem sustainability. The reason I actually mentioned in my first introduction that we are quite unique. So you can see here actually where actually does GCF actually sitting overall this financing umbrella. So if you look at on other MDBs, DFIs, philanthropy, so our average ticket for each project may be 50 to 70 million, but because of our risk-taking appetite, it actually put us in a quite unique and a middle space that other actually cannot compete or other cannot actually come to place that area. This is a GCF2, which is we call like is second replenishment year going on. So we're trying to prioritize the readiness and preparatory support so that actually country can get more readiness to accessing large financing, but also our target is mitigation and adaptation, how we create a paradigm shift into the across the sector, but also how we make sure that actually support most vulnerable communities who are actually need to have support conflict and fragile economy, and then how to attract the private sector so that we can create a more co-financing platform or bringing other finance into this particular area, because the finance gap, as you hear more and more, is more like $1 trillion, but we have $1 billion. So how can actually we reduce those gaps is quite important. So far we mobilized over $16 million or $16 billion. Together with the co-financing, it's a $61.5 billion in the market. And if you look at our geographical distribution, we trying to cover same 50-50. Adaptation and mitigation is still adaptation is 57% and mitigation is 43%. But if you look at the geographical coverage, you can see actually after Africa, Asia Pacific is actually our major programming actually going on. So if you are connecting from South Asia, reach out to India to understand more about the climate financing and what are the projects are actually going on in the country, and also give us some feedback actually what impact those projects is creating, so that we can replicate or scaling up some of those opportunities. And we also use, as we said, that differential financial instrument in terms of grant, highly concessional loan, result-based financing, guarantor, equity. So this is a distribution, but it's still, you can see actually we are quite large financial instrument is actually grant and maybe a highly concessional loan. And if we just look at on the South Asia and the Pacific, because that's our region, we have already mobilized only Southeast Asia and the Pacific $33.53 billion amount of project together with our partner. And it covers all those project thematic area that we discussed, most vulnerable and communities, low emission transport, forest and land use, infrastructure, built environment, health, well-being, and water. Those are the areas, and you can see that across the geographical distribution, most of the countries has able to receive so far many of these projects which are ongoing. But however, actually, as we see more and more, actually demand is increasing, but there is a quite bit of challenges that how we attract the market or how we access the climate financing as a multi-sector. There are actually a lot of challenges still remains, and you can see a financing access modality is quite create a barrier in terms of knowledge and how to write a quality concept note or how to actually articulate climate change into a climate financing modality. Um, there is a lot of limited investment into the innovation area because we still actually a lot of thinking on the traditional way of doing things. So how we can actually bring those innovation is challenging. So overall, it creates a little bit volatility when actually you try to create those kind of integration into the national space, that how all the sector has equal support or access to financing. But the modality here, the way the climate finance works, is works through the NDC and NAP. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the national determinant contribution that overarch your overall country goal, that how much you want to mitigate or adapt. And then that leads to you that, okay, what are the national adaptation plan? And based on the national adaptation plan, you actually prioritize some of the sectors, some of the project, some of the program, and that actually only qualifies to access the climate financing. And while you have a many priority, how you prioritize your sector is quite important. Either it could be water, it could be energy, it could be food security. It depends on the need by the country. And I think that sometimes leads to a competition as well as lack of integration to accessing the financing. But also when you're looking at the climate finance and climate change and climate risk impact into your sector, is quite complex because it's not just straightforward. There are actually disciplinary as well as multiple integration are there. So you're looking at some global to local, you try to looking at day to century, you try to integrate all the sectors, you try to looking at other interrelationship, cascading and compounding linkage, and that require a sort of multidisciplinary, multitasking, coordination and enhancement, and how your all the policy are actually coherent with each other. So I think that's maybe one of the biggest gap we see to scaling up some of those climate financing activities. And I think that require a lot of co-production and co-design of the programming so that actually we are all in the same page, understand each other's needs, and then able to prioritize those things. In GCF, we provide some of those guidance based on the sectors, either if you want to design a low emission transport project, water project, an early warning system project, or energy project, we have a sectoral guide. And sectoral guide often actually link up with a project preparation guidance. So we provide actually step-by-step guidance how you can actually design and prepare your project. Just for an example here, in the water space, we are trying to look at more on the blending grants with innovative financing. Instrument like water bond, cat bond, or guarantor investment, or debt for climate swap, that kind of bringing an innovation into the financial side of it, but also how you bring some of the critical areas like water efficiency, conservation, hydrological observation, or early warning system for flood and drought, SDG 6 achievement or integrated water source management, how you mobilize or how you promote ecosystem-based adaptation or nature-based solution, climate resilience WASH, and as well as community capacity building activities. So those are actually quite important while actually you're doing your sectoral assessment and the needs and where you need to be invest or looking for investment. And in particular, if you want to access the Green Climate Finance or Green Climate Fund funding access assessment, you always need to make sure that actually there's a 6 investment criteria or metrics that we follow. Your concept or your ideas actually has a fulfillment to climate action, that what kind of climate action you're actually bringing into the field. And then it need to also look at what are the paradigm shift, because you're talking about climate change is emerging. So if it is emerging change, what are the new innovative solution you need to bring into the market to support the solution, not currently, maybe future. And then how that actually sustaining or how that will be support sustainable development goal. And then any problem that you or any activities proposal you bringing is need to be have a recipient needs. So that means it need to be come from the bottom up, not the top down prescription. But also it need to be have a country ownership, which is I mentioned about NAP, NDC, National Development Plan, National Climate Change Plan, that need to be attract or articulate those kind of problem And then also efficiency and effectiveness, that how actually financing you actually investing, what kind of actually profit or benefit it's actually bringing into the market. There are several programming we supported. You maybe saw that in one of the largest project we actually announced into the COP, which is a glacier to farm, a $3.5 billion into the Central Asia. Similarly, we have supported several activities, like in Pakistan, after the 2022 flood, we provided $70 million ecosystem-based adaptation for flood risk management. To ensure that actually the most vulnerable communities into the floodplain, they actually able to have some protection from the future flood risk. Similarly, we did in Iraq recently, which is most vulnerable and fragile, because if you go to the fragile economic state, where development is actually quite constrained, climate change is actually far away to think about by the government. So we think that we actually need to be ramp up to support such kind of things, to making sure that actually people who are actually suffering with climate change, they have some support. Similarly, we have some project in Bangladesh on drought risk management, community, coastal community resilience activities. So these are all actually the program. You can actually find many of those information. If you just go to our website, you can search by thematic area, you can search by countries, you can search by region, and you can find all sort of programming that we provided. So far, there are 215 projects we supported globally, but maybe a large chunk, as you see, that 35% of the project are actually in the South Asia. So you can actually able to access those proposal, concept note, what are the activities going on. And if you find it interesting, feel free to reach out to those implementing agency or accredited entity to provide your support, or you can reach out to an NDA with the government, that how you can actually support or engage those kind of programming. So I think I can stop here now, but also feel free to read our last year annual report, which also have a lot of case study and good practices that may help you to better understand how the climate financing works, what the transformation change we actually bringing, and then what are the challenges, but what are the new opportunity in the market. I think I can stop now, but let's see if anyone has any question. Happy to answer.
Thank you, Bapon. We also streaming this on our other social media platforms. I received few questions. So one thing that okay, for this participant already in this session on Teams, you can ask your question by raising your hand, or you can write it down on the chat. So I will take one by one. So before starting being an host, I will take a little bit liberty to ask my own question first. So one other thing that stuck in my mind, you mentioned that risk-taking appetite, that other funds don't have it. So one of the funding that given to Pakistan was on Sarmaya Car, that is one of the startup. So you are also funding on those startups that are just been started. So how this risk-taking appetite, and one of the criteria that it is must be some innovative to look for all those different types of scenarios of the climate change we might not have known at the moment. So risk-taking appetite and funding all those startup. So what are on your take on this one?
If you look at our last board, we actually approved a project with NABARD in Pakistan. Sorry, NRSP in Pakistan, where actually they try to promote those kind of support through the national banking to the private sector, as well as startup MFIs, to having access a highly concessionality. Because when you're talking about the climate finance, or bringing or supporting or giving an opportunity to our new startup or new entrepreneur, when they go to the national bank, your interest rate is quite high, and it has a short period of time. And I think that doesn't give them a strong visibility, or bankability of their investment. So what GCF try to take cover on those kind of things, that we can actually go highly concessionality. In some instance, most of our concessionality goes 0% interest rate, or maybe 0.75% interest rate. And sometimes we go as a tenure for up to 40 years, which you will never find into the national bank or any other DFIs. And that gives an opportunity for the locals to utilize those kind of financing through those partner and having a bankable opportunity. But also it takes lots of fast loss guarantor, or we can actually bring an equity and guarantor instruments that could actually enable that their investment is de-risk in the market. So we always like to see actually what are the various risks that as a startup or a private sector is facing in the market. Do we have a policy? We can support those kind of policy or regulatory function, and then you can actually provide those kind of concessionality.
Wonderful. So we receive a question from Dr. Nadeem Sarwar and Dr. Jamshed Ali. So these both, I think, are more towards on the capacity building. So I just add one small comment here. So Pakistan's finance minister long back in Woodrow Wilson Institute in America, he was talking, and he mentioned about those lots of opportunities available for climate financing. But he mentioned that we don't have, as a government institute or local NGOs, don't have the capacity like finance, education, and other part to attract those kind of a funding, because again it's require lots of capacity building in terms of project proposal and other things. So how Green Climate Fund can support on in terms of capacity building in that area?
Now that's a good question. I think, as I mentioned, that we are actually providing a catalytic financing. So when I say catalytic financing, it's not just a project or a financing you provide for project. I mentioned about the readiness finance. So for developing the capacity building for the country, we have a particular cap each country can access, which is actually now 4 million for 4 years. So which means every year you can actually take $1 million to build your capacity so that you can actually access the large financing from the vertical climate financing field, and you can build your own capacity. That how to write a proposal, how understanding the challenges, how to articulate those things into a concept. And most often, actually, through the readiness, we try to see how that could help us for a programming, which means actually using that money, you actually try to come up with a good proposal, quality proposal that could ensure you to access the bigger financing. So that's one way. But also we provide a lot of, this kind of operational manual guidance, project preparation guides. Those are online available. Some of those training are also available online. But also we organize some of the regional dialogue where actually the country representative we invite and then actually discuss together with them that what are their priority, what kind of idea they have, and then we try to bring those kind of capacity building for climate financing.
I think thank you so much for your answer. I think the one of the most important slide that I got this Green Climate Fund investment criteria, to making it a little bit more understandable that these are our criteria. So it could be a sort of a targeted one. So one more question regarding this is the huge in not only in South Asian countries but also in so many other developing and underdeveloping countries, the transparency and the governance part. So even if we are getting the fund, but it's very difficult to spend it on in transparent way, and for a effective every dollar like should be go into a certain way, and also in transparency not only to the fund provider but to the communities as well. Is there any mechanism that we can ensure the transparency as well?
Well, I mean, as we mentioned that we work through our partners, so which is like a accredited entity. And the accreditation process is actually quite cumbersome and quite thorough. So we actually look at all those kind of fiduciary as well as regulatory functions, so that actually we make sure that there is a transparent system are available through our partner. And also with that, we believe that the organization who actually accessing the funding on behalf of the country, they have those all due diligence in place, tools and technology, so that they can properly monitor any kind of misuse or mismanagement. And also, other than that, there are actually independent evaluation unit and many other mechanism in place within the GCF and together with the partners. So making sure that actually fund those are actually mobilizing in the country, the most vulnerable or our beneficiary able to access those benefits. So that's the whole purpose of the funding mechanism, those due diligence as well as accreditation process.
No doubt. So I think the accreditation process certainly will help. So one thing, if we talk about in this all from COP29 to even before as well. So when we talk climate financing, so one thing come back. So this is the one question as well, that with many South Asian countries already facing high debt levels, how can climate financing be structured to avoid exacerbating these debt distress?
I think this is a challenge, as you mentioned, but this is an opportunity we can see on the other way. Obviously, when we actually provide our financing, we don't actually look at sovereignty ranking or other things, which actually other MDBs actually try to look at when you accessing the loan or other support from, say, international entities. So for us, that's not our criteria. Our criteria is actually equal distribution, equity, and as well as supporting to our most vulnerable communities, our people. And then looking at that aspect, South Asia can provide also a biggest opportunity. So if you look at our in the last board, we actually approved a project for climate for debt swap, and that's the first kind we are able to introduce a small country island like a Barbados. So if Barbados can actually introduce a debt swap because of the high debt on the country using a climate finance, South Asia could be forefront to leading those things more demonstration. So this is a big opportunity for them because market is more larger and opportunity is bigger. But we don't see actually yet those are actually project coming. And then it's not GCF wants to can promote like, oh, you should do these things. This country need to be promote that we really wants to do these things. Barbados able to do that because their leadership into this field. If you look at the Honorable Prime Minister in Barbados, she was very vocal about climate change and climate financing. And that's able to bring them actually that state to create a leadership role, how they can actually demonstrate some of those innovative financing project. And I think that is an opportunity for South Asia. If the government take a leadership role, really determined as well as committed on this particular area to come up with a quite innovative project design. And there are strong bankability available within the South Asian context, but also there are a lot of startup and private sector out there who can actually crowdsource their money together to creating a greater impact.
I think very well said, as you mentioned as well in your presentation as well. Okay, no doubt there is an unprecedented challenge, but there is lots of opportunities as well to think something out of the box, to think something that probably never done before. And one thing you mentioned in this answer, the ownership. So the definition of ownership of the projects is kind of a change over in few years lately, that it should come from the community, from the country. So what do you see? What could be still there are lots of issues. If I follow 2022 Pakistan floods and also in Sri Lanka and other regions as well, most of those times, not only those NGOs is not entirely connected with the local community. So they may be sitting 1,000 kilometers away in Islamabad or in Karachi, and they are very good somehow in writing all those proposals. And later on, we don't see that sustainability of those projects. So I can give you lots of examples for this, but ownership and then the sustainability. And one thing, the ownership about the governments as well. If any private organization, NGO is taking any funding, how to ensure that the government also take that ownership at the local level as well.
I mean, that's very good point you raise. I mean, if you just give an example on Pakistan, or Pakistan flood. So if you look at last 20 years, I think we can actually show more than 15 flood management project has been funded by various government. But still actually community is actually suffering the same like 50
Mm.
years back. So why is that one? Why not there is a sustainability has been created? So because actually, if you look at the underneath of those reasons, One is actually we never able to create a financial sustainability. A project ends, you actually packed the everything gone. You build people's capacity at the government level. Obviously, with their increased capacity, they may be moved to a other big institution or better, job opportunity. So, so which actually indicates again that actually we need to be think differently from our traditional approach to a new way of thinking. So that means you cannot actually manage your project just for grant-based financing. That as a developing country, we just always try to look at, oh, somebody will come and help us, and then we'll be surviving. So that concept need to be removed. We need to be think of that how we manage by ourselves and what additionality we can actually bring from outside so that actually it create a long-term sustainability. And not only just programmatic, but also financially. And that's the point actually you need to look at how can actually we little bit go out from the grant financing to a little bit other financing mechanisms so that we see a revenue generation opportunity or some ownership by the community so that actually there is a either revenue budget is there from the government or community budget is there or by the other mechanism we are able to sustain those kind of infrastructure and facilities. Unless we are able to do that, I don't think a just project by project based will not able to change the reduce the vulnerability of our most vulnerable people.
No doubt. I think it's more towards on the ecosystem and creating that thing. One question I received just now. So there was one thing, just an example that in one of Pakistan's province, one agency with some collaboration with other agencies and some embassies as well, developing a provincial disaster response program. So that's a huge framework they are developing, and there are so many months it's been under development. And there is another agency got the international funding as well, and they are working gender response plan as well. If you look at from your perspective, the gender response should be part of that disaster response plan, but they are developing their own, and obviously we know that they work in silos and they love not to share all those what they are doing. It is still happening. So how to make sure there are certainly more funding opportunities, more institution will come up in the future. How not to make some parallel projects or overlapping each other, or recreating the wheel which might be already created. Is there any talk at the highest level, not at the local level, or highest level from the donors, not to duplicate or multiply or parallel kind of a project is happening somewhere?
I think most often it's a sovereignty issue actually. How, as a national government, you like to see your finance inbound is coming and how you want to distribute and coordinate. So often you will see that there is a strong coordination mechanism within the national government with the donor agencies. But at the international level, we also try to look at actually what is happening before we actually uh, designing a programming that how can we leverage other ongoing initiatives. And also, as I mentioned in my talk, that policy coherence is quite important. So because we all need to be work together as a each sector or agency or institution, we may have our own mandate and activities, and we need to achieve that one. But at the same time, we need to make sure that that has been anchored by a national development goal or a NAP or maybe an NDC, so that actually everything are interconnected, so that you do your bit, but you sure that your bit is actually supporting to others. So the one that you just mentioned, you may have a disaster management plan, but you can also have a gender action plan. That's important for the Minister of Women Affairs, but they need to make sure that there is a coherence and there is actually support each other. But if they are both silos, it doesn't actually help. So where actually we find those kind of coherence, that is actually quite important. And that mechanism need to be run through, I think, the national government itself.
And also we see that not all South Asian countries has developed or submitted their NAP, National Adaptation Plan, as well. So when we don't have those plans already locked in, somewhere. So it is very difficult to see that what the national government is wanting, and also in case of Pakistan and Sri Lanka and even in India as well, where it is trickled down to the state level. So national is kind of a framework, and then implementation and what kind of project they need, because each state is entirely facing different types of hazard, having different types of capacity as well. So we have one more question: how see GCF ensuring that poor economies with lack of trained human resource for robust projects developing get access to climate fund? Again, I think you touched already on this before. If you like to extend.
Well, I think I already mentioned that actually, obviously, our focus is on most vulnerability. And that's the reason actually we and supporting to our poor economics or underdeveloped countries capacity, we introduce those readiness financing. Just as we just touched upon the NAP, other than this readiness $4 million, we also support additional $3 million country can access for developing their NAP. So these are all actually opportunity for the country. If they don't have a NAP, they can actually come to GCF to access those $3 million to develop their NAP and make sure that actually that's aligned with their national strategic plan as well as NDC. And from there on, they can actually access the financing. But I think that readiness finance is a answer for this particular question, that there is a resource available. They just need to be make sure coordination with NDA, which is like a national determinant authority under the UNFCCC, because they decide how the readiness financing will be packaged for a country. So other ministry or other department need to be coordinated with them to prepare together that, okay, we as a country, we like to see our $4 million should be help us across these are the most vulnerable sector to build their capacity.
And one thing regarding the ownership, that all those projects and other kind of a what type of funding they require, it's kind of it should come from the countries. But if you look at from other side, like in South Asia and others in other African countries and less developed countries, so that will of elite that is not there yet. So there are lots of good thing in the taxation and other parts. In just an example of Pakistan, is happening just because of the pressure of IMF from the donors. If the donor is asking or kind of a pinning down, you need to do this to achieve this fund, and lots of things get better. And I can give you lots of example, but this is not the forum. So one thing is also in terms of ownership and other thing. I don't know. Okay, is this a good idea to ask the country to do this, or will this work, or we are already beyond from this ownership already?
I think we are not on that, because our job is actually just supporting for the climate finance or accessing climate finance to the country as a vertical fund and making sure that country able to achieve the Paris Agreement goal through their NDC and NAP. So those kind of pressure we don't need to put from our side. We actually a country driven, as we mentioned. So if they really wants to access the climate financing, they need to have some due diligence, and those due diligence is part of those systems that they have to have those kind of documentation procedure or regulatory function are in place so that they can actually access the financing.
Wonderful. One last question before we end up. The international scenario regarding the climate change, it's a lot changing every day, and we can see what is happening in USA and other countries. We never know how many countries will follow this new trend of jumping the waka. Waka is the term you very well aware that we use in New Zealand. So what do you see that is happening in terms of international at the time we have the momentum from COP29 that we need to allocate lots of funds. But what do you see the international financing scenario in future as well? Will we able to sustain whatever the gap that is already have, or able to bridge this?
I mean, you saw in the COP, negotiation that we need trillions and we have only billions. And then now we actually able to increase from $100 billion to $300 billion. But whereas actually your requirement is $1.5 trillion. So that is definitely a big financial gaps. And the more year will go, the pie will be, cut short, because there are a lot of other initiatives coming. bilateral, multilateral, as well as their own, own country, own development. So then you may expect that there could be an ODA could be actually reduced for each of those countries. So you have to consider all those factors. So the day is going, your hazard is increasing, your demand is increasing, population is increasing, but finance is actually reducing. So, so how are you going to manage? And that's where the innovation need to be bring, because that's why I mentioned that actually you cannot just think of that actually funding will be coming from outsource as a grant, and then you can able to actually solve the problem. So we need to be more innovative in that space to create a more enabling environment where and how can actually you can create more space, or how can actually crowdsourcing other financing, especially the private sector financing, so that actually we can really demonstrate some good programming.
Very true. I think the message probably is here that money is not the solution. We need to have something other avenues as well. So, Bapan, I don't have any more questions left in the chat. And anyone who got any more questions, you can contact Dr. Bapan on LinkedIn and other areas as well. I would really like to thank you for your time, and it really appreciate for clarifying and giving us a wonderful presentation and staying for the question answer as well. So we will put this as a separate as a presentation and also a separate question on our all social media forums. Again, I really appreciate your time and thank you so much. And we are able to contact maybe in the future as well. Thank you so much. And
No
thank you
problem.
everyone who
Definitely.
participated in this session. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Take care. Bye.